On this edition of the Correspondents, Iraqi and Kurdish forces turn up the heat on Islamic State, closing in on a city seen as crucial to defeating the terror group. With immigration in the national spotlight and political races around the country, Muslim American candidates are making their presence known. And a third and final U.S. presidential debate in Nevada ratchets up the campaign rhetoric as the Trump and Clinton campaigns enter the final stretch. Hello and welcome to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Arcega in Washington. The operation to retake Mosul has begun. Iraqi government and Kurdish Peshmerga forces are now closing in on the Islamic State stronghold. Now, military officials say the operation is a crucial step in removing the terror group from Iraq. But as Henry Ridgewell reports, the closer the advancing forces get to the city, the more difficult the fighting and the more dangerous the situation is for civilians trapped in the city.
A propaganda video released by Islamic State Wednesday purporting to show its fighters defiantly patrolling the streets of Mosul. A masked militant addresses the camera and warns the United States that they will be defeated in Iraq. Despite the rhetoric, Islamic State fighters are rapidly losing ground. Iraqi and Kurdish Peshmerga forces say they are ahead of schedule in their mission to retake Mosul. More than 100 US troops are with Iraqi and Peshmerga forces behind the front lines. International coalition jets are targeting Islamic State positions in Mosul. Local residents have told reporters that fighters are forcing civilians into buildings that are likely to be targeted. Up to 1.5 million civilians are thought to be in Mosul. Many are expected to flee the fighting, presenting an opportunity for militant fighters to escape. That could allow IS fighters to regroup in Syria or neighbouring countries, or even to try to reach Europe.
So what happens next? Joining us now in our Washington studio, VOA's Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb, along with our national security correspondent Jeff Seldin. Welcome, and thank you both of us for joining us. Carla, I'm going to start with you because you have multiple sources throughout the Pentagon here. So give us... Tell us what the strategy exactly is going to be in Mosul. Is the idea to surround the perimeter and then slowly work their way into the city center? Or what's going to happen there?
That's the basic gist of it. There are two key points in the south and the southeast by Iraqi security forces, and they're using those two key points. One of them is Kiara West, where that's a hub for the Iraqis and for some Americans there to go up from south to north. There are also two key points in the east, one in the northeast, one more in the east, that the Kurdish Peshmerga are taking, and that's the way that they're entering from east to west. The west is still left open, though, if you notice, because the Islamic State still has control over much of that territory.
Jeff, and what we seem to be seeing is Islamic State forces trying to take advantage around the perimeter of Mosul and sort of attacking other locations near that city.
Well, this has been an expected tactic. It's one that they've used for quite a bit, but you've seen in the lead up to the offensive against Mosul an increase in suicide bombings and terror attacks inside Baghdad. And then most recently, over the last couple of days now, there's been more fighting elsewhere. And just most recently, there was a sleeper cell that activated in the city of Kirkuk, taking on some of the Kurdish and Peshmerga forces there. Reinforcements had to be sent. Security officials that I've spoke with fully expect that they'll be seeing more of that in an effort by the Islamic State to divide and distract the troops that are trying to
divert
concentrate
some of the focus away from Mosul. Now, Carla, we're already hearing reports that Islamic State fighters are not backing down. There have been reports of, in fact, casualties and possibly an American soldier down.
That's right. One American soldier was killed. He was actually, my sources tell me, he was driving around in a vehicle. He was not on the front line. He was back from the front line, driving around, hit an IED. And they medevaced him out, but he was not able to beat his wounds. He succumbed to his wounds and died. This is the first U.S. casualty in this fight for Mosul, so it was a very big deal. But Secretary of Defense Ash Carter reiterated today, he's in Turkey, and he said, you know, just because the United States soldiers are not on the front lines, that doesn't mean that they're not in harm's way. So
they are in danger.
Everybody has to stay vigilant here.
Jeff, of course, the criticism has been that we gave Islamic State fighters way too much notice of an impending attack. Did we give them too much notice?
most security and military officials you talk to say that's not been the case, because part of the battlefield is not just the military fight. It's not just moving the different military pieces into place, but there's also the political element. And so part of the telegraphing was part of the military strategy, but also part of the political strategy, part of the groundwork that had to be laid for them to be able to move on Mosul. One of the unique things about the operation so far, and there are deep concerns about how much this can hold up, but so far, you have Kurdish fighters, you have the Peshmerga forces who are Kurdish, you have the Iraqi forces, and you also have the Shia militias, the so-called Popular Mobilization Units, or PMUs or PMF, all working together, all following the command and control that's coming out of Baghdad so far. So that in and of itself is amazing and was a huge concern going in. Whether or not it's going to hold up is a concern. Some of the Shia militias have already said they're going to start moving to the west. There's a town, city, Tal Afar, that was a Turkmen town, and there was a lot of fighting, and it's been an ISIL hub. The Shia residents were kicked out. The Shia militia now say they're going to be moving on Tal Afar, close off the corridor to the west. And there's concerns about how that may play out. But because of the way that the U.S. went about and the Iraqis went about saying what was going to happen, it enabled them to get everybody on the same page, which was, again, a very big concern.
Carla, so what I'm hearing is estimates are that between 3,000 to 5,000 IS fighters in Mosul versus, what, 20,000 Iraqi forces and, what, 10,000 Peshmerga? How is that even a fair fight, and how is this going to be a tough fight for us?
Well, the Iraqis and the U.S.-led coalition don't want it to be a fair fight. So answer there. Even at its best with Islamic State, if they have over 5,000 fighters, it's still going to be about 6-1. And that was done as part of the planning. A lot of people criticized how long it took the Iraqis to get ready for this fight. And I think that you're seeing this week, with the speed that they've been able to move forward, this will silence some of the critics. Maybe it took a little bit longer than some critics would like for them to be ready, but at least as they're moving forward, everything is going as planned. I want to touch on what Jeff Seldin said, because he mentioned that there have been some attacks elsewhere. And the Iraqis and the U.S.-led coalition have also planned for this. Yes, there are more than 100 U.S. advise and assist members helping with Mosul, as Henry Ridgewell said, but there are also additional forces hanging back in the Euphrates River, advising and assisting Iraqis there, hanging back in the area around Baghdad to prevent any of these surprise attacks as much as they possibly can, because they don't want the Iraqis to lose focus on Mosul. Mosul is the key, Mosul is the big prize here, but they're not giving up on the rest of the country while they're focusing on Mosul.
Jeff, despite their fewer numbers, Islamic State fighters do tend to do fairly well in these kinds of situations. We're talking about asymmetrical types of tactics that generally are not used by conventional armies.
Yeah, I mean, if you used a boxing analogy, you might say that sometimes they're able to very much punch above their weight. And what they've done well, and when they've done well, it's when they've used the asymmetric tactics, the guerrilla tactics, the terror tactics. That's when they've done well. When they've tried to act as a conventional military force, generally that's when they've been hammered and lost territory. The other thing to remember is that they've had 2 years, essentially, to prepare Mosul. And as U.S. officials have said, they are planning to turn Mosul into hell on earth. They've got trenches filled with oil, they've got tunnels, lots of booby traps. I mean, even if you look at the Iraqi forces when they moved into Ramadi and Fallujah, they had to go painstakingly, house by house. Everything was a booby trap. Everything was an IED, whether it was a refrigerator, a couch, a door, a Quran. So it's the closer in, as the forces move closer into the city center of Mosul, the tougher the fighting is expected to get. And despite the optimism at how fast it's moved so far, military officials have been quite clear they expect a long fight.
I'm already being told to wrap this up, but I can't leave this discussion without talking about the civilians. Has the Iraqi army provided any kind of safety for these civilians? Is there a plan to keep them out of harm's way?
They've actually dropped leaflets this week encouraging civilians to hunker down where they are, because they are afraid that if they try to escape, that the Islamic State will either use them as human shields or try to shoot them as they escape. There have been some civilians that have left the city, but there's still estimates of about 1 million civilians still there. Okay, well, thank you very much. I know both of you have contacts that you have to reach out today to follow up on these stories. Thank you very much, Carla Babb, and thank you, Jeff Seldin. We're going to take a short break right now, but when we come back, VOA takes an in-depth look at what it's like to be a Muslim American candidate running for political office in what has been so far an unusually bitter and xenophobic election cycle.
We'll talk to the award-winning reporter who followed those candidates. This is The Correspondent on Voice of America.